All right, well, welcome everyone to today's Zoom Lunch and Learn. Hope everyone's staying warm on this cold Calgary day. And today we have as our guest one of our members, Angie Redecopp, and she will be speaking to you about her experience as a lawyer and managing risk. So I hope everyone is excited to hear more about that. And if you're not aware, ReSourceYYC is a co-working space here in downtown Calgary. We offer private office spaces, meeting rooms, and drop-in options. So if you're ever in need, come check us out. Over to
you. Great. Well, thank you. I like talking about legal stuff. So hopefully this will be of interest to you and not too dry. I know legal things could, aren't always everybody's top topic. So I am going to share some slides, and there's kind of a bunch of different areas I want to go through. Very information heavy. If at any point you have questions or just, hey, can you clarify this? Can you spend more time on this? I'm happy for this to be interactive and flexible. So my goal really is to talk to you about what I would identify as the main kind of legal risks or things that people need to think about if they are thinking about or have a small business. And really, these are the things that I get asked about the most. So I'm just going to share screens here. So I'm calling it managing legal risk. I mean, I also sometimes think of this as finding opportunity as well. I find often when companies kind of get their legal house in order, that it opens up opportunities. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be scary in terms of thinking about legal things. Yet I know it sometimes can be. So the 5 areas I'm going to try and hit just legal structures. I know most of the folks at ReSourceYYC already have companies set up, so I won't spend a lot of time on, should you have a company, but I'll talk a little bit about that. I want to talk just a little bit about intellectual property protection, a little bit about contract. Well, I could talk a lot about contract protection, but just really, how are you managing your relationships? Everybody who has a business has some sort of relationship, whether it's with clients, whether it's with co-founders, how do you manage some of those relationships? A couple comments on early stage financings, and then just a few comments on what I'm referring to as ESG risks and opportunities, but really surrounds the concept of policy making. When do you do that? When does a small company start thinking of things like that? And again, you can stop me at any point. So just starting off then with companies. Most of you, I assume, are incorporated. So the when to incorporate and why isn't necessarily particularly important to you. I've got a list here. Usually it's, liability. You want to keep it separate. What's going on in the business might be tax reasons. As soon as you set up a company, it's its own person. It's going to be taxed separately, typically at lower rates. If you have partners, it's often easier to, set up a corporation. You can each, co-own, you can each own a portion of that. Sometimes it's professionalism. In my world as a lawyer, I can't avoid personal liability. So lawyers can't sort of hide behind a corporation in terms of liability. I'm personally liable. So that reason goes away, but people usually expect to work with a corporation when they're dealing with lawyers. So that's one of the reasons that I'm incorporated. And then just somebody says you have to. You might be a consultant. I know many people at ReSourceYYC are consultants, and their clients are often going to say, hey, in order for us to work with you as a consultant, you need to be incorporated. So lots of different reasons. Most of you have probably already figured that out. A couple other comments that I'll make here. I've got a couple links here, and Rosemary, I'll send you the slides. You're welcome to share them with the group here. So I often get asked, should I incorporate federally or provincially? You've probably been down that road. Only comment that I'll make on that is you need to register, which is different than incorporating. You need to register everywhere you're doing business. So if you have set up, I assume you're all based here in Alberta. Maybe that's not a safe assumption, but I'll assume that if you are, you have employees and you're doing a whole bunch of business in, say, Ontario or BC, you need to register there as well well. That's not the same as incorporating, but there's a step that you need to do regardless of whether you're federally or provincially incorporated. So just a piece there. And then I'm getting more and more smaller companies come to me around this idea of not-for-profits. Depending on the space they're in, they might be eligible for grants. You know, there's different things that they're looking at. So I'm getting more and more questions from smaller companies. Hey, should I set up a not-for-profit because I want to access these grants, or, you know, I want to do these different things? And my response usually is, if your only reason to set up a not-for-profit is to get a grant, probably no. But there's lots of other great reasons to set up not-for-profits. And for this one, I'm just going to leave you a link. This will take you to an article on my website that just tells you the different not-for-profit structures. But I guess the only point that I'll leave you with, lots of good reasons to set them up, but they're more involved. It's not as simple. Like for those of you that are consultants, you're only shareholder, director, officer, you know, of your company. With a not-for-profit, it's not as simple. So lots of good reasons to do this, but it's not as simple as setting up a company. I also get asked, usually early stages, is, hey, should I set up a partnership instead? My answer there is usually no, unless there's a tax reason to do it. People generally only set up partnerships because they're tax driven. And simple reason there is, if you're in a partnership with somebody, you have liability for everything they do in the name of the company. Whereas if you're incorporated, again, the liability sits with the corporation. So really, I'm just raising flags for you on this. We won't go into tons of detail there. And then I also just have a link here for you. If you do want to know more about incorporation, that'll just take you to some basics on incorporation. So yeah, different structures are available to you. Usually the for-profit business corporation is the structure that people choose. And that's good. You know, that makes all sorts of sense. One other thing I'll just mention, partly because in my world, I work with a lot of social enterprises. I've worked with a lot of for-profit corporations that are focused on, you know, social type concerns. So I just want to put really a plug in for what's called B Corp certification. So this is a certification you can get in Canada if you are taking on environment, social governance things. If you're doing those sorts of things, is to just point out that B Corp certification is a certification. It's not a type of incorporation in Alberta. In BC, there's actually a thing called benefit corporation, but in Alberta, if you were looking for something like B Corp certification, you would still incorporate as a regular for-profit company in Alberta. And then you would seek B Corp status. And I'll say a little bit more about that later, but threw it in here just because a lot of people think it's a type of incorporation, which isn't the case. And then last thing, well, this kind of gets into relationships as well, but last thing I'll say, just in the context of structure is and this is where I spent a lot of time on this, both with companies in the startup phase. They've got partners or they have co-founders and they want to figure out, okay, how do we make this work? And then unfortunately, I spend time with founders 10, 15 years down the road and sometimes it's happy exits. So then that's a good thing, but sometimes it's unhappy exits. You know, it's no longer working, and they sometimes it doesn't work very well in terms of how they're getting out of it. So just a couple comments I'll make here is just around founder agreements or shareholder agreements, as they're more commonly referred to as. These are challenging, and yeah, but I encourage them. So as soon as it's more than just you or you and your spouse, or like, you know, somebody that you are otherwise partnered with, you probably need to think about a shareholder agreement. And the idea behind a shareholder agreement is two main things. You're providing for how is decision making going to work? Like, how are we going to make decisions? How are we going to function together? You might get into the sort of detail, like in terms of, you know, who's going to do what. And then the other piece is going to be, how can we either issue new shares or in terms of agreeing to issue new shares, and then how can we sell shares? And usually a shareholder agreement will limit your ability to sell shares, because, you know, if Susan and Shane, I'm assuming you're not business partners, but if you were to go into business together, you wouldn't necessarily want the other person to, just randomly sell their shares to somebody else and find that you're doing business with somebody else. So pretty important if you're doing business with somebody more than just yourself, particularly if I always tell people, think of a third of your shares as being kind of the magic number. As soon as somebody else is coming in with more than a third of your shares, that's when you want to think about shareholder agreements. Because practically speaking, if you're still holding 2/3 of your shares, there's really no decisions that you can't make, other than, regardless of how many shares you have, you can't force that other shareholder to sell their shares, but you could dilute them. There's other things that you could do. So if you're on your own and you're ever thinking about, bringing in somebody, think of that 33 1/3% mark as being the magic number. In terms of voting control specifically, if you're ever giving that up, that's when you want to think about shareholder agreements. So won't spend a lot of time on this. Minute books. If you're on your own, you probably set up your corporation. You may or may not, be doing annual resolutions. Honestly, if you're on your own, doesn't really matter. I mean, technically, yes, you are offside corporate law. You're supposed to do a shareholder resolution every year, a director resolution every year, but really, who is ever going to ask, if it's only you? But if you are a company that is, thinking, hey, I'm going to bring in partners, or I may raise financing, or I might be doing business with somebody that's actually going to do due diligence on me, that's when you want to make sure your minute book is in order. And then regardless of whether you're just parking your minute book and your corporate stuff and never looking at it, the one thing you do have to do every year, which again, you guys probably know, is an annual return. So there's a step, you need to take every year to maintain your corporation. And then the only other comment I'll make here is you, as a shareholder of your corporation, even if it's the most basic corporation out there, as a shareholder of your corporation, you are supposed to actually pay for your shares. So if you have an accountant, that helps you with your books, they probably said, oh, that $10 you said you paid for your shares, it should actually show up, on your financial statements. So just kind of a note for yourself that that your shareholding should show up on your financials. That's all I'll say about minute books. And with any of this, I mean, I'm in at ReSourceYYC usually at least once a week. I'm happy to answer basic questions on stuff like this. Switching gears. So that's all I'll say about setup, unless people have questions. And again, wave at me or just speak up if you want me to pause. Couple comments about IP asset or like intellectual property protection. For some people, it really is not high priority. Again, if you're on your own, if you are not in the business of creating intellectual property, probably irrelevant. For me, I'm a lawyer. I'm on my own. I mean, I have one staff member that does some work for me. I haven't done any of the things that I'm going to list off here because intellectual property is really not relevant. I shouldn't say it's not relevant. It has little relevance to me, as a lawyer in terms of my own, like I'm not creating new legal ways of doing things. But if you're in an industry where your name, your ideas, things that you write, you do want to protect them, then kind of two separate roads that you want to go down. I'm actually going to start with the thing at the bottom, which is registering IP. You can register trademarks. So a trademark is like a name, an image, a logo. So if you have something that you think this is going to be what, when I'm hanging my hat on, this is what's going to make my business, you want to think about trademark protection. If you have a process, some way of building something or doing something. So now we're getting into the world of patents. You want to think about patent protection. Copyright. So copyright covers anything that you write, you might be in the world of both patents and copyright. Copyright is actually automatic. So patents, trademarks, you have to register for. It's a process. It's not a simple process. You have to register for them. Copyright is actually automatic. So if I publish something, whether it be on my website or, in a journal, wherever, I actually have automatic copyright protection. You can do another step and get formal copyright protection. You don't have to, though. It doesn't give you kind of any more legal standing. But it's pretty rare. And I have on the next slide, I've just got some links to more information on trademarks, patents, and copyright. So those are steps not everybody takes. But if you have kind of, so that's the maybe track that you might go down. But what I think everybody needs to consider if they have something that they think they might want to protect is the first two things that I have here. So the first one is non-disclosure confidentiality agreements. And you have to make that decision for yourself. Is your secret sauce, what you're doing within your company, is it something that is confidential, that you don't want others to share? So then if you are talking to, it might be clients, it might be employees, it might be contractors, whoever it is that you're sharing information with, basic non-disclosure confidentiality agreement. And those, as a lawyer, I don't really like to tell people, oh yeah, what you pull off the internet's fine. In this category, there's a lot of NDAs out there. So most things, talk to a lawyer or think about it carefully if you're pulling something off the internet. NDAs, there's a lot of them out there. So you would be able to find something publicly available. And then the second step here is, so that's protecting your information. Next step is talking about ownership. So if you are developing something with somebody, you've got somebody working on an app for you, you have somebody working on something else that has, that you've determined this is important to intellectual property, you want to be clear in your agreements who owns it. And I see this a lot with contractor versus employment type relationships. So the starting point, if you have an employee, is what they do for you in terms of intellectual property belongs to the employer. So that's the starting point. But then the question is, well, what about what they're doing outside of ours? What about what they're doing where they've taken something, that they're working on with you, and then they're developing that into something else for themselves? So those are the sorts of things you want to think about, if you're contracting with an employee. With a consultant, the starting point is that the intellectual property associated with what the consultant creates is theirs. Now, if you are contracting them for services to create something for you, that kind of mitigates against that. But particularly if you're dealing with a consultant, and again, they're working on something that you think will have intellectual property value, you want to work that into your contracts. I or your company, owns whatever it is, any intellectual property associated with any services they're providing with you. I'll talk about master service agreements in a few minutes. That's probably one of the most heavily debated points when I do master service agreements for clients. So master service agreement, that's you as a consultant, or service agreement, you as a consultant, that's the agreement that you're going to have with your clients. If you're creating something for your client, same thing, that's going to come up. Is the client claiming, hey, any intellectual property associated with what you've made for me is mine? Sometimes yes, but then I have a lot of service providers that are no. The know-how, the processes, whatever it is that I'm creating for the client, the end product, the document, or the program that I create, yes, that belongs to the client, but any intellectual property associated with that, like if anybody's going to be filing patents, it's going to be me. So that varies a lot, but it's again, just something that you want to be thinking about. And for those of us, again, like me, I'm not thinking about this, with my business, but if I was creating a unique website, if I was creating some sort of unique, legal process or something like that, then I would be. And then these are just the next slide here is just the links that I mentioned in terms of IP registration. And I'll just pause there for a second. Any questions so far on the IP pieces? As I said, lots of information. So relationships, this, I mean, covers a whole gamut. You know, we talked a little bit about, you know, co-founders. Relationships could include employees and contractors. This could include your clients, you know, if you're a consultant or in some sort of service-based or, you know, other type business where you're providing services to others. Could also involve investors, you know, if you're looking at fundraising down the road, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. And I think the biggest point here is first of all, it doesn't have to be complicated. Something is better than nothing. You know, again, as a lawyer and you know, say you're a consultant, I'd rather see you with a solid service agreement or master service agreement that you're using with your clients. But even if you have a 1 or 2 page, this is what you're doing, this is who owns the IP, this is how I'm going to get paid, it's better than nothing. So yeah, do think of it as, you know, have a something, you know, even if it's on a written piece of paper, even if it's in email form, you know, okay, you know, confirming what we agreed on, something is better than nothing. Now, more is better than something, I guess, you know, more covering, you know, all of those key terms is even better, but something is better than nothing. And when you are thinking about, again, whether it's just going to be on a 1-pager you're doing yourself, or whether you're engaging a lawyer, any sort of relationship you have, you know, who's going to do what are the limitations in terms of sharing information, in terms of intellectual property. Sometimes, you know, with employment or contractor relationships, people will also work in like non-solicitation type provisions, like you can't poach my clients. Non-competition provisions are getting harder to enforce. That's kind of its own topic. But you know, who's doing what, and then what is it that you need to protect? And a lot of folks now are selling things, you know, through a website. So website terms and conditions is something that's coming up more and more. So think of website terms and conditions, and most websites, you know, many of them, you go on the very bottom and you can see, you know, terms and conditions or terms of service. Think of website terms and conditions as being the company's contract with all of the different people that use their website or their services through their website. So it's kind of like a services agreement. It's very one-sided, and you know, it's for everybody that uses the website. And the idea behind a website terms of service, again, is, you know, what is it that you're telling people that they could use the website for, and then lots of limitations in a website terms of service. You know, you are responsible for what you use information for on the website, you know, limiting liability. Website terms of services are very one-sided because you're not negotiating them like a master service agreement. You're saying click, you know, click that you agree. Although they do, again, whole nother discussion, you know, in terms of whether they're enforceable. They generally are. And it's just interesting actually from a legal perspective because they are so one-sided. But kind of point for this is, who are you? Who are your relationships? You know, everybody has a relationship with somebody. You're either selling a product, service, you know, there's somebody that you have a relationship with. Is there anything that you need to clarify? And is there anything that you need to protect in terms of that relationship? And then boards of directors probably doesn't apply to most of us. Like for my, you know, law firm, I'm the only director, so I have 0 director policies. But if you are a company that is, you know, a little bit bigger or has what I would call independent directors, so directors that aren't also employees, that's when you might want to think of, okay, well, what does that relationship look like? What is my board of directors doing versus what am I doing? So with all of these, you don't need to worry about them until you're there. But if, you know, so for me, my key relationship is with my clients. Service for legal services. You know, that's my main agreement. It's really, for me, the only agreement I spent a lot of time on. A little bit embarrassed to admit. So I have a law student that works part-time for me. My arrangement with her is in an email because I know her really well. Not legal best practice, but for me, I didn't see a lot of risk there. So didn't spend a lot of time on that. Not legal best practice though. So so I'll pause there. Anything anybody wants to ask about in terms of oh, and I actually see, I'm just going to check the chat. Okay, good. Oh, and ESG, somebody I think said ESG question mark, environment, social governance, and I'll come back to that. But anything about relationships, contracts, etc. And we'll have time for questions at the end. Okay. So next one may or may not be relevant to folks.
Angie,
but
I just thought,
yes.
Sorry, if you could flip back on relationships. One of the things, I've got a small corporation. I'm being recently asked to sub to another small corporation. Is there anything, like as a subcontractor to another one, is there anything I need to think about?
Well, I would enter into kind of a subcon, like it would be a good idea, as between you and the other person. Key things is who's responsible for what. The poaching one, I think, is going to be relevant there. Them not taking the client. And then, confidentiality, probably, unless of course the end client gets you both to sign. So often clients will want you to sign.
I would expect the end client's going to have us signed, so.
So then that's probably covered there, but other than the how are you going to pay them and what that, so there's kind of like just the terms of the relationship. Probably the biggest legal concern I would have would be poaching.
Okay.
Can they take your client or not? And then the other comment that I would make, I didn't get into the employees versus contractors, but people often treat people like contractors who should really more properly be treated as an employee. If they are incorporated, those issues go away. So you said it was with another company. So any issues about, hey, should I be treating them as an employee versus a contractor would go away.
Yeah, and there's multiple different clients and stuff like that. So that's not an
issue.
That part's all covered. It just has to do with the who's responsible for what, and we're kind of negotiating right now. So
and some of those pieces, the who's responsible for what, is going to be a little bit different, each time as well. So sometimes with contractor type agreements, you'll have your main agreement, and then you might have a schedule. We call them statements of work sometimes, but a schedule for each job. It's like, okay, so here's the main things that always apply no matter what, and then here's the job specific information.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So financing, again, might not be relevant for everyone. One warning I give anybody, though, like whether it's just a single partner you're bringing in, somebody who's going to like work alongside you, whether it's somebody that's going to invest money, is always consider dilution. This one actually amazes me a bit, the number of founders that are looking at raising money and they don't really understand their own, and cap table is like your shareholder table, your capitalization table, and they don't really understand their cap table, and they're like giving up potentially half the company because they need to have raise $150,000 for the next thing that they want to do. And I know $150,000 sounds like a lot, but I'll often tell my founders, I want you to stop and think of how much time you've already put into this thing, sweat equity, possibly money, and value your company somehow or other. And it's hard to value a company, but if you're bringing in a partner or investors, like anybody again other than yourself or maybe your spouse, somebody that you're really just adding potentially for tax reasons, you need to think about value. And I find that I find both. I find founders who way overvalue what they've done to date, and then I see founders who just don't give it enough value. So important one for people to pause if they're bringing in other people. Really minor, but if you are bringing in future investors, often when people start a company, they just issue like 100 shares. You can remedy that later, but if you're going to bring in investors and other people when you set up your company, start with like issuing yourself like 1 million shares. Just makes it easier, and it can still be for like $10, but just a small thing there. And then lots of different types of early stage financings, and I have links for all these. These actually go to, I do work directly, but I also work through a platform called Good Lawyer, which I think ReSourceYYC is familiar with. So these links actually take you to some Good Lawyer information where it just gives you a bit more background on what does an equity, and so I'm using terminology. So equity means shares. So if I'm raising money, if I need money in my company, I can sell shares. So, say Barry's going to invest $100,000 in my company. I could sell Barry shares. He gives me $100,000. I issue him shares. And in terms of dilution, our big negotiation is going to be how many shares or what percentage, of the company am I going to give Barry for the $100,000. The other way that Barry can invest is a loan. He could loan me $100,000. Way back when I was much younger, I owned what used to be called Let's Play in Calgary. It's an indoor playground. And I had an uncle who, hey, I'll help you out here. He wanted nothing to do with shares. He didn't want to, worry about, the company itself, but he was willing to loan me money. Okay. Interest rate, loan, etc. So different ways of doing that. And then in the financing world, there's a whole bunch of things that are in between. And we call those convertible securities. So that's a loan that can convert into shares. And I won't get into tons of detail here, but when I practiced law, so I practiced law twice. I practiced like 10 years ago for about 10 years. So I guess 20 to 10 years ago, and then did some other stuff, came back about a year ago. And the types of convertible securities has completely changed. So when I practiced, 10 years ago, convertible securities was a loan that could convert into shares. Now we have things called SAFEs, simple agreement for future equity. We have KISSes, keep it simple, securities. We've got a number of sort of hybrids that are in between, and I won't get into those in detail. Again, happy to answer questions, but I do have some links here on those. Again, only relevant if you're taking on like investors. If you're taking on, a partner of sorts, somebody that you want to have run the business with you, odds are they're going to be taking shares of your company. You really only get into these conversations when it's money that your investors bringing in. And I won't, again, I don't know, how many people that one applies to, so I won't get into more detail there unless you want me to. I am going to say something about options, but any other questions about financings generally? And then the comment I'll make about options, I am actually seeing this more and more with smaller companies that have a few employees. You want to incentivize your employees and give them kind of a piece of the pie, but you're not wanting to give them a big piece of the pie. So a lot of companies will use options. That's not something that just big companies use. So an option would be, we'd enter into an agreement where you would have the option of purchasing securities, and that option would expire, say 5-10 years. Usually there's a pretty long life to options. So the idea would be, like, if you're a newer company, the strike price or the exercise price on that option would be quite low. So maybe I'm issuing options to each of my employees that they can buy a certain amount of shares at 5 cents each. And if everybody did, maybe that would add up to, say, 10% of my company. You're not usually using options for a big chunk of your company. So then the person holding that option would have, 5 or 10 years to exercise that. So what that would mean is, say 5 years from now, the company is doing great. It's grown, share price is higher. Maybe share price is now $1. Well, I have an option to purchase those shares for 5 cents. So I can buy the shares for 5 cents, and depending on limitations on transferring your shares, I can sell them for $1. And the unique thing about options versus shares is you don't have your tax hit, assuming you have an option plan and you do it properly. You don't have a tax event until you sell your shares. Whereas if you issue somebody a bunch of, like, say you issue employees a share, like in lieu of pay, they're taxed on them right away. So some taxation issues as to why you use options over shares. But that's something that I'm finding smaller companies are definitely considering more, partly just to keep employees. How can I incentivize employees to stay with me? Even if we're like a five person type shop. Okay, I think that's all I will say on that one. And then just, so ESG, I don't know if you call this risks or opportunities, especially for smaller. So for a big companies, you know, the world of sustainability, responsible business, corporate social responsibility, whatever words you want to use. And then now the terminology, we're seeing a lot more, you know, ESG, environment, social governance. For a lot of your bigger companies, this is now on the slate in terms of these are things that we want to do. These are things we must do. Lots of companies want to, but for a lot of bigger companies, banks are an example, you know, more reporting requirements coming down. I do a lot of work in the area of like supply chains, so business and human rights and supply chains. You know, there's new legislation that will likely get approved. We're thinking January, that will require big companies to disclose their supply chain practices. So in the big company world, you know, a lot of big companies, especially brand or consumer facing companies, will have, you know, ESG reports or sustainability reports. What I'm finding though in the space that I live in is the small to medium sized business world is it's both starting to trickle down and come up. And the way I'm seeing it is, you know, bigger companies that are contracting with service providers or others. So bigger companies that are contracting with smaller companies, we're seeing some trickle down. We'll likely see more trickle down. So as the big companies have to report more, they're asking for reporting, or they're asking more questions of their service providers, which could be consultants like us, legal provider like me. And I'm also seeing it in the other direction. A lot of the startups that I work with, even though they're for-profit companies, a lot of the startups that I am working with have, and I don't think it's just because of age. I know we've got some millennials, you know, we've got the spectrum on this call, and yes, millennials ask a lot of these questions, but so do people my age and older, you know, that like, how can I, you know, frame my business, still want to make money, but, you know, what can I do in terms of ESG responsible business? So I'm seeing it come from both directions. I'm seeing it with folks starting companies, and then I'm also seeing it required, you know, from more senior companies. And I think the challenge, and actually for this one, I am just going to flip to, let's see if this works. A diagram that I have on my website. Can you see this? It says ESG. Okay, wasn't sure how that worked with the screens. So with small companies, and I some of this I just direct companies to other people in terms of the ESG space. Some work I do myself, but really specifically, and I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but this just gives you a diagram of some of the different things that people talk about, and even like really small companies. So for myself, you know, 1 to 2 person shop, I am actually looking at B Corp certification. So I am looking at all of these things, even though my footprint, like, again, I'm small. But so what I want to emphasize here is if you are a small company thinking about this materiality piece is really important. If you're a small company that, you know, has next to zero, you know, carbon footprint, well, you probably don't need a whole bunch of environmental policies. It doesn't mean that's not important to you, but it's not where you can affect the world. And for me, I don't have that many places where I can affect the world. You know, I have one employee who, you know, I try to treat well in my world because I'm in this space. You know, there's some other ways that I have influence, but there's my list of what's material is much shorter than, say, you know, another business that has numerous employees, or, you know, makes an actual product, or, you know, has service providers in higher risk countries. So it looks a whole lot different for everybody. So materiality is huge. You know, who do you need to talk to? What do you want your objectives to be? But you can put ESG really in the whole realm of policy making, which nobody likes the word policy making, but, you know, what is it about your business, whether it be for business, like for business purposes, or whether it be for, hey, I want to do things a little bit differently. Where is it that you need to, you know, create policy and processes? And I generally encourage people, you know, whether you're doing something, whoops, wrong way there, whether you're doing something for purposes of, hey, I want to be able to do this particular thing in a more environmentally friendly way, or a more socially friendly way, or whether you're saying, hey, I need to create more policy because I need to do this more efficiently. They're all really part of the same process. You know, where is it important in your business to write something on a piece of paper, to figure out a process for yourself, to figure out, and it could be kind of like when I talked about relationships earlier, something is better than nothing. You know, where is it that you need to put some thought into your policies and different things that you want to do. And where I'm seeing this in the ESG world, well, because of my bent in terms of businesses and supply chains, you know, even smaller clients will sometimes have an international supply chain of some sort, you know, where they're either service providers, you know, their own service providers, or products are in higher risk areas. So that's where I'm seeing companies give some attention to this. And the other area where I'm seeing it is certainly environmental, if it's a company that has a significant footprint. And then the other area is in terms of employee policy making, is, you know, whether it be diversity, inclusion, whether it be stated policies, but, you know, where through, you know, the people that we employ and we contract with, where can we, you know, improve our policies. So backing up, I'll just go back to our kind of agenda here. Lots of sort of big picture things that I encourage companies to think about, and really any other, I'll actually stop sharing so that I can see you guys better, but anything else that you would like me to comment on or answer questions on.
We have a hand up from Shane.
Oh, sorry, Shane, go ahead. Oh, and I can't hear you, Shane. Is that just me? Yes, and there is a problem with your audio. You're not showing as muted, but we can't hear you. The joys. Just while he's figuring out his audio. Oh, what's B Corp certification? So, and when you do get the slides, behind that image was a link as well. So it's a certification. It's actually global, but there's a Canadian counterpart to it. So it's a certification. It's almost like you get a big list of things that you tick off. So do you have employee policies on this? You know, do you have supply chain policy on this? So it's kind of a big list of things that you look at within your company related to things to do with environment, social, governance. They don't call it ESG, but those are really the categories that they hit. And then you'll get a score. And then once you achieve a certain score, you can get what's called B Corp certification. And it's a symbol that you, like if you have B Corp certification, you can see it on people's websites. So it's really, I would say the smaller, there's big businesses that have it as well, but it's, I would say small to medium-sized businesses. It's I'm not saying an easy way, but a somewhat straightforward way of framing your, you know, what sort of policies do I need to say, you know, that I'm more sustainable or that I'm being responsible. And there's also lots of other frameworks out there, you know, GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, SASB, like there's tons of frameworks out there. Like if you Google ESG frameworks, so there's no shortage. And the only reason one of the reasons that I flagged the B Corp though, is I just feel it's just a little bit more digestible for a small to medium-sized business. Plus there's an actual certification that you can get out of it if you want. Even if you don't care about the certification, it's still lots of, and it can be do it yourself. You could work with a consultant or a lawyer, but you can do it yourself as well. Lots of information on what's behind it. But it's to briefly answer the question, it's a certification for a company to indicate, hey, we've done, you know, a whole bunch of things to be more sustainable.
Hear me?
I can faintly.
Okay, I'll move closer to the mic. Can you hear me better now?
There we go. Yeah.
Angie, my situation is a little complicated because I'm a founder with 3 other guys of a new company. They don't have the same business background, so they tend to say, well, let's just go. We don't have to incorporate right away. You know, we trust each other, so we don't really need to have shareholder agreements, etc. I've been around too long to trust those kinds of points. So rather than take time right now, I assume that you are open for business and that you're going to be sharing your contact information, and maybe I can call you later this afternoon and arrange an appointment to come and talk to you.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll put my email in the chat because I don't think I put it on the slides, and my number. And just one comment on that. We trust each other. I get that. I do. And you don't want to set up agreements. Sorry, let me make sure I'm spelling my email right. You don't want to set up agreements to be divisive. But one thing I also tell people is, I get that you trust each other, but especially if there's 4 of you and there's spouses, do you want to be doing business with your spouses or, you know, your business partner's spouse at some point? You know, what if something happens? So it goes beyond just the trust within your group. You've got other people potentially involved. So that's one. And then the other is, if you don't kind of put it on paper, or at least talk about it, what are the expectations? You know, what are the expectations in terms of who's going to do what? So I kind of liken it to a marriage relationship. My husband and I do not have a written agreement on who's doing what. We talk about these things. You know, we communicate about these things. So it's I think it increases the trust, you know, if you have those conversations, really, because then you know kind of what the boundaries, etc. are.
I agree 1,000%. Look forward to talking to you about it when we're able to get together. Okay.
Sure. Sounds good. Any other questions? And even if it's something we haven't touched on, and if I don't know the answer, I'll just tell you it. Okay, great. Well, I will hand it back over to you then, Rosemary.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Angie. And yeah, everyone, I encourage you to reach out to Angie, as I hope you've all managed to, even if you haven't learned anything new, had something brought to mind that you haven't maybe thought about in a while. So reach out to Angie, and yeah, she's part of the Good Lawyer platform, who's a partner with ReSourceYYC. They actually started here in Calgary, and they've got lawyers all across Canada. So we really encourage you to check them out, and maybe if Angie can't help you, someone else can.
Yeah, for sure.
But
Good
so
job.
always reach out if you need any help, is kind of what I take from that. Or if you've got any questions. Good Lawyer is great, and you can do little brief 15-minute information sessions just to figure out if you need a lawyer or not. So that.
And I'm just going to put the Good Lawyer. I'm sure it's on the ReSourceYYC stuff too, but
it is on our homepage.
Thanks, everyone. I got to take off, but
Take
thank
care.
you very much. It's a good refresher. Bye.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us.
Take care,
And
everyone.
Angie's information will be in the description when we post this video as well. So
Perfect.
Thank you very much, Angie. It was great. Thank you to ReSourceYYC again.
Take care. Thank you.
all right, bye everyone.